When my daughter-in-law told me to stop calling her Beta, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't the smile of peace, but the kind you wear when your heart breaks quietly inside your chest. I remember standing there in the kitchen that morning. The sunlight was pouring through the small window, touching the steel pots on the rack. The smell of cardamom tea filled the air. Everything looked normal the way it always had. But her words, they changed everything. "My name is Rena," she said. "You don't have to call me Beta. I'm not a child." I looked at her face. Not angry, not rude, just firm. I nodded, pretending I understood. But in my heart something trembled. For years I had dreamed of this moment. The day my son would bring home his wife, the girl who would fill our house with laughter again. I thought she would become my daughter, the one I never had. I thought I'd teach her how to make my son's favorite lentil curry, how to fold the laundry just right, how to balance family and dreams. But life, I learned, doesn't always follow the dreams of a mother. My name is Asha. I'm 58 years old. I spent most of my life in a small town, raising my son Arjun, after my husband passed away when Arjun was 10. We didn't have much. A 2-room house, an old fan that groaned in the summer, and a small garden where I grew marigolds. But we had love. We had laughter. Arjun was a quiet boy, thoughtful, serious. When he studied, he would sit cross-legged on the floor, lips moving as he read each line aloud. I used to watch him from the doorway, my heart swelling with pride. I told everyone, "My son will become something great one day." And he did. He worked hard, got a scholarship, and moved to the city. He became an engineer. The first in our family to graduate. The first to wear a tie to work. I remember the day he left home. He touched my feet before stepping onto the bus. I placed my hand on his head and whispered, "Never forget who you are, Beta." He smiled and said, "Never, Ma." Those were his last words before the bus disappeared down the dusty road. I stood there long after it was gone, waving to the empty wind. Years passed. Arjun called me every Sunday. He'd tell me about the city lights, the tall buildings, the fast life. I'd listen, trying to picture it. My boy walking among strangers, eating food that didn't taste like home. I missed him, but I never told him. I didn't want him to feel guilty. Then one day, he called with a shy excitement in his voice. "Ma, I met someone," he said. I smiled, my heart racing. "Tell me about her." Her name was Rena. She worked in his office. He said she was smart, kind, and beautiful. I could hear the love in his voice. I prayed for her that night, that she would love my son the way I did, that she would keep him happy. A few months later, he brought her home to meet me. I cleaned every corner of the house, polished the old plates, and even bought a new curtain. I wanted everything to be perfect. When she arrived, I was struck by her beauty. Rena was graceful, wearing a light blue dress and silver earrings that caught the sun. She smiled politely and touched my feet, and my heart melted instantly. "Welcome home, Beta," I said. She looked slightly surprised, then smiled again. That evening I made all of Arjun's favorite dishes: lentils, rice, potato curry, and sweet kheer. We laughed, shared stories, and for a moment I felt complete. After dinner, when I was washing dishes, Rena came and stood beside me. "Auntie, you don't have to do this," she said softly. I smiled. "It's my joy, Beta." She looked at me, hesitated, then said, "Thank you." I didn't know then that those small hesitations, those polite smiles, were the first quiet cracks in something I believed was unbreakable. When they got married a few months later, I cried. Not from sadness, but from pride. My son stood tall, holding his bride's hand, and I whispered to myself, "Your father would have been so proud today." I blessed them with all my heart. I thought this was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with laughter, children, and shared meals. I imagined Rena calling me Ma, sitting beside me in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. But reality, like rain after sunshine, comes quietly and changes everything. When Arjun and Rena moved to the city after their wedding, I told myself I wouldn't call too often. I wanted to give them space. I'd wait for Arjun's calls, sometimes days, sometimes weeks apart. But whenever he called, his voice felt more distant. "How's Rena?" I'd ask. "She's good, Ma. Busy with work. And you?" "I'm fine. Just tired." I'd smile through the phone. "Eat properly, Beta. Don't skip meals." "Yes, Ma," he'd say. And that would be it. I tried not to overthink it. But sometimes silence feels louder than words. Then one day he called and said, "Ma, we want you to come stay with us for a while." My heart leapt. "Really?" I asked, tears of joy filling my eyes. "Yes," he said. "Rena thought it'd be nice if you came." I hung up and immediately started packing. I brought my saris, some homemade pickles, and the framed photo of my late husband. I wanted a piece of home with me. When I reached their apartment, I was amazed. It was beautiful. Tall windows, shiny floors, everything so modern and perfect. I stood in awe. Rena greeted me politely. "Welcome, Auntie." I smiled. "It's good to see you, Beta." She nodded and helped me with my bag. That evening, as we ate dinner, I noticed how quiet Arjun was. He kept checking his phone between bites. Rena was polite but distant. I told myself it was just adjustment. The city life was fast. Maybe they were both tired. Over the next few days, I tried to help around the house. I cooked breakfast, watered the plants, folded laundry. But one morning as I was making tea, Rena walked in. "Auntie, you don't have to do that," she said. "Oh, it's no trouble, Beta. I like helping." She sighed softly. "It's not about help. I just prefer doing things my way." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it left a sting. I stepped back. "Of course," I said quietly, setting down the spoon. From that day, I stopped going into the kitchen unless she asked. Days turned into weeks. Arjun would leave early for work, return late at night, sometimes too tired to talk. I'd wait for him, sitting on the sofa, pretending to read the newspaper. When he came home, I'd smile. "How was your day, Beta?" He'd shrug. "Just the usual, Ma. Long meetings." Rena would serve him dinner, and they'd talk about their office, their plans, their friends. I sat there, invisible, listening quietly. One evening, I brought up the idea of visiting my old temple nearby. Rena said, "That's fine, but please let us know before you go out. We keep a schedule." I blinked. "A schedule?" She nodded. "Yes, for everyone. So we can plan meals and time." I nodded slowly, not knowing what to say. A part of me felt like a guest in my own son's home. A week later, on a Sunday morning, I decided to make breakfast just once as a surprise. I woke early, made parathas and tea, humming softly. The smell filled the house. Felt like old times. Rena came out of her room, looked at the kitchen and frowned. "Auntie, did you use the nonstick pan?" "Yes, Beta. I cleaned it before and after." Her voice rose slightly. "We don't use that for oily food. It ruins the coating." I froze. "Oh, I didn't know." She took the pan from the stove, turned off the gas and said quietly, "Please, next time just ask." I wanted to say I'm sorry, but my throat felt tight. Arjun walked in just then, sleepy-eyed. Rena told him what happened. He looked at me, then looked away. He didn't say a word. That silence, that quiet avoidance, it hurt more than anything Rena said. That night, I sat on the balcony watching the city lights. I thought of all the years I had spent for him. Skipping meals so he could eat, working late to pay his school fees, whispering prayers for his safety. And now he couldn't even meet my eyes. I told myself not to cry. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. But deep inside, I knew something was changing. The next morning, when Rena came to the table, she said, "Auntie, I think it's better if you rest and let us handle things. You've done enough." I smiled faintly. "Yes, of course." She didn't mean it cruelly. Maybe she just wanted her space. But to me, those words sounded like a closed door. That evening, I called my neighbor back home. She asked, "How's the city? Are they treating you well?" I hesitated, then said, "They're busy, that's all." I didn't want to burden her with my sadness. But when I hung up, I looked around the apartment, spotless, silent, cold. I realized I had never felt this lonely. Not even after my husband's death. Because this time, loneliness lived right beside love. That night, I whispered to my husband's photo, "I think our son has grown too far from us." And though the walls didn't answer, I could almost hear his quiet voice in my heart. "Be patient, Asha. Mothers are made of patience." I smiled through my tears. Maybe he was right. Maybe patience was the only language love still understood. The days began to blend together. One long stretch of silence, politeness, and pretending. Every morning I'd wake up before them, boil water for tea, and quietly sit near the window. I stopped going to the kitchen unless asked. I stopped asking questions. I stopped expecting smiles. It's strange how quickly we learn to make ourselves small. Smaller than our voice. Smaller than our feelings. Rena had a habit of organizing everything: drawers, kitchen shelves, even the living room cushions. Everything had its place. Everything except me. I tried to stay useful. I'd water the plants, dust the shelves, iron their clothes. One afternoon, while folding the laundry, I found a shirt of Arjun's that was missing a button. I sewed it back carefully like I used to when he was little. When I handed it to him later, he smiled politely. "Thanks, Ma." Before I could reply, Rena said lightly, "You don't have to do that, Auntie. I usually take care of our clothes." I nodded and smiled, though inside I felt something twist. It wasn't about the shirt. It was about being needed or not being needed. All my life I had built my world around my son. And now, standing in this clean, perfect apartment, I didn't know where I belonged. At night I would lie awake, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter from the other room. It wasn't loud or cruel, just quiet happiness I wasn't part of. Sometimes I'd hear Rena say something, and Arjun would laugh softly. That laughter used to belong to me once. Now it sounded like someone else's music playing in the next house. One Sunday, Rena announced they were having friends over for dinner. She asked me if I could rest that evening because the dinner was a work thing. I smiled and said, "Of course." So I stayed in my room, listening to the sound of glasses clinking and laughter echoing from the dining area. I wanted to step out to help to meet his friends, but I didn't. I didn't want to embarrass my son. Later that night, when they were cleaning up, I walked into the kitchen to get some water. Rena looked up and said, "Oh, Auntie, we've already cleaned everything. You can relax." Her tone wasn't harsh, but her words made me feel like an intruder in my own son's home. The next morning, Arjun came to my room. He looked tired, but there was kindness in his eyes. "Ma, Rena told me you didn't come out last night. You should have. Everyone would have loved to meet you." I smiled softly. "It's okay, Beta. You were busy." He sat down beside me, took my hand and said, "You're not happy here, are you?" I looked at him for a long time. Then I said quietly, "I'm fine, Arjun. You're happy, that's enough for me." He didn't press. He just nodded, kissed my forehead and left for work. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't angry, just invisible. But I didn't, because I didn't want to make things harder for him. A few days later, something small, something ordinary, changed everything. Rena had gone shopping, and I noticed some vegetables in the fridge going bad. I thought, I'll just cook them before they spoil. So I made a simple curry, the kind Arjun used to love as a boy. When Rena came home, she opened the fridge and frowned. "Auntie, did you use the carrots I bought yesterday?" "Yes, Beta. They were getting soft, so I thought. They were for a recipe I planned for tomorrow." Her voice was calm, but the disappointment was sharp. I quickly said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." She didn't reply. She just took a deep breath, closed the fridge and walked away. That night at dinner, the air felt heavy. Arjun ate quietly, avoiding my eyes. No one said a word. When I went to my room later, I heard them talking softly in the hallway. Rena said, "She keeps interfering. I can't live like this." And Arjun's reply, a soft, tired sigh, broke my heart more than her words ever could. Because he didn't defend me. He didn't even try. The next morning, the silence was unbearable. I wanted to leave. But where would I go? My old house was empty now. I decided to stay a little longer. Maybe things would soften. Maybe Rena would see my heart, not my mistakes. Days passed. The distance between us grew like fog, quiet, cold and thick. Sometimes she'd come home from work and walk straight to her room. Sometimes she'd smile, but it never reached her eyes. I tried everything, making tea, complimenting her, offering to help, but it all felt like knocking on a door that would never open again. One afternoon, I found Rena sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. I gathered my courage and said, "Rena, did I do something to upset you?" She looked up surprised. "No, Auntie. Why? You seem distant." She sighed. "I just like my space, that's all. I'm not used to living with parents." I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. "I was young once too. But inside my heart felt like a thin glass, ready to crack." That evening, Arjun came home early. He looked restless, pacing around the living room. Finally, he said, "Ma, Rena's parents invited us to visit next weekend. Would you be okay alone for a few days?" I smiled. "Of course, Beta. Go enjoy." He hesitated. "You sure?" "Yes," I said, hiding my loneliness behind a smile. "I'll be fine." When they left that Friday, I watched them from the balcony, hand in hand, laughing as they got into the taxi. I waved, but they didn't see me. The apartment felt different without them, quieter, yes, but also lighter somehow. I cooked for myself, listened to old songs, even laughed once or twice at the memories they carried. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. But when they returned, the air changed once more. Rena was polite, but I could feel something colder in her tone. She had grown bolder, more distant. She no longer hid her irritation when I spoke. One evening, she said sharply, "Auntie, I think you should stay with your relatives for a while. We're both very busy, and it's hard managing 3 people's routines." Her words stunned me. Before I could answer, Arjun looked at me, silent again just like before. He didn't say no. He didn't even say wait. He just looked down. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass. How did we get here? How did my son, who once held my hand crossing the road, become this quiet stranger who couldn't speak for me? I wanted to blame Rena, but deep down I knew it wasn't just her. It was time, distance, change, and love that had turned into something unfamiliar. The next morning I began to pack my things slowly, quietly. When Arjun saw the small bag by my door, his face softened. "Ma, you don't have to go right now," he said gently. I smiled. "It's fine, Beta. Rena's right. You both need your space." He didn't argue. He just nodded like a tired man agreeing with the weather. Rena said nothing. She simply watched me from the hallway, her arms folded. Before I left, I placed a note on the kitchen counter. "Take care of each other. Eat on time. Don't forget to smile. Love, Ma." I walked out quietly, not wanting to disturb them. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that makes you think of endings. As the taxi drove away, I looked back one last time. I could see their silhouettes by the window, small, distant figures, growing smaller with every turn. I whispered, "Stay happy, my son." When I reached my old home, everything was covered in dust. The furniture, the walls, even the silence. I unpacked slowly, setting the photo of my husband on the table. I sat down beside it and said softly, "He's grown up now. He doesn't need me anymore." For a long time I just sat there, staring at the picture, feeling the years press down on me. That night, I slept for the first time without waiting for footsteps outside my door. But the story didn't end there. Because even after leaving their home, my heart refused to leave my son. I still called every few days asking about their health, their meals, their lives. Rena rarely answered. When she did, her voice was polite, too polite. Arjun spoke briefly, always saying, "Everything's fine, Ma. Don't worry." But I could tell something wasn't right. His tone had changed, heavier, quieter. I didn't ask. I just prayed. Then one evening I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Rena. "Hello, Auntie," she said. Her voice was tired, softer than usual. "Hello, Beta. How are you both?" She hesitated. "Arjun isn't well. He's been very stressed." My heart raced. "What happened?" "Work mostly. He doesn't talk much these days." I felt a mix of worry and sadness. "I'll come tomorrow." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "Maybe that's not a good idea right now." Her words were calm, but my heart broke again, in the same quiet way it had before. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought of my son, tired, stressed, maybe unhappy, and me sitting miles away, unable to even hold his hand. It's strange how motherhood doesn't end, even when your child stops reaching for you. That was the beginning of the real distance. Not the physical kind, but the kind that lives between hearts. It was also the moment I realized something had changed forever. But I didn't know then that the worst was yet to come. That soon, my son would stand by and say nothing while I was shamed in front of others. And that silence would echo louder than any cruel word. It had been 3 months since I left my son's home. 3 months since I folded my sorries into that small bag and told myself it was just for a while. But a while stretched into weeks, then months, and still no one asked me to come back. Sometimes Arjun would call, Short calls, polite, careful. How are you, Ma? I'm fine, Beta. And you? Busy but good. That was all. No one asked if I was lonely. No one asked if I missed them. Still, I prayed for them every night before bed. I lit a small lamp beside my husband's photo and whispered, "Keep them safe. Keep them together. Even if they forget me." Then one morning, my neighbor Kamla came over with her usual chatter. "Have you heard, Asha? There's a community event at the temple this Sunday. You should come." I hesitated. I hadn't stepped out much since coming home. But something in me said, go. Maybe a little light, a little prayer would help ease the ache in my chest. So on Sunday, I wore my plain blue sari, pinned my hair neatly, and walked to the temple. The bells rang softly. The air smelled of jasmine and incense. I closed my eyes and felt peace, a kind I hadn't felt in months. After the prayers, as I was leaving, I saw a familiar face near the gate. It was Rina's cousin, a young woman named Neha. She looked surprised to see me. "Auntie, you're here? I thought you were still living with them." I smiled faintly. "No, Beta. I came back home." "Oh," she said, glancing away. "I see." Her tone made me curious. "Everything all right?" I asked. She hesitated, then said quickly, "Yes, yes, of course." And she left in a hurry. That moment lingered in my mind. Something felt wrong. A few days later, I received an invitation, a printed card delivered by courier. It was for Arjun's office celebration. The company was honoring employees' families, and my name was listed among the guests. I stared at it for a long time. My son hadn't called me himself, but the card had his signature at the bottom. I told myself maybe this was his way of reaching out. Maybe he wanted me there. So I decided to go. On the day of the event, I wore my best sari, the one Arjun had bought me years ago on his first paycheck. It was light cream with a golden border. Simple, elegant. I took the train to the city. My hands trembled as I held the strap. My heart was nervous, not from fear but hope. When I reached the hall, it was already crowded. Lights, laughter, music, everything bright and modern. I felt small in that sea of strangers. Then I saw them, Arjun and Rina, standing near the stage, greeting people. Rina looked stunning, confident. Arjun looked proud beside her. When his eyes met mine, for a brief moment, something softened in his face. He smiled faintly and walked toward me. "Ma," he said, his voice low. "You came." "Of course, Beta," I said, smiling. "You invited me." Before he could respond, Rina approached. "Auntie," she said, her tone polite but cool. "I didn't know you were coming." I showed her the card. Your names were on it. Her expression tightened for a second, then she smiled. That practiced smile I'd seen before. "Well, welcome," she said. "Please sit. We'll start soon." I nodded, feeling like an uninvited guest at my own son's life. The ceremony began. People clapped, laughed, took photos. Arjun received an award for excellence. My eyes filled with tears as I watched him go up the stage. Tall, confident, shining. When he gave his short speech, he said, "I couldn't have done this without my wife Rina, who's been my strength and support." I smiled, but my heart sank just a little. Not a word about the mother who raised him through sleepless nights. Not a mention of the woman who taught him to dream. But I told myself, it's okay. This is his moment, not mine. After the ceremony, people mingled around the hall. I stood quietly near a corner, watching from afar. A group of Rina's friends approached her, laughing and teasing. One of them said loudly, "So that's your mother-in-law? The one you said still treats you like a child?" The words sliced through me like glass. Rina froze for a second, then laughed softly. "Oh, you know how mothers are, old habits." The girls laughed again. I stood there, my heart pounding. My ears buzzed. I wanted to believe I'd heard wrong. But when I saw the embarrassment in Rina's eyes, and the silence in my son's, I knew I hadn't. He was standing right there. He heard everything. And he said nothing. For a long moment I just stared at him. He looked away, pretending to check his phone. Something inside me cracked. Not with anger, but with the quiet sound of final understanding. All my life I had protected him, defended him, prayed for him. And now when I needed him to protect me, even with a single word, he couldn't. I turned and walked away, out of the crowd, out of the noise. No one stopped me. Outside, the evening air was cool, the streetlights soft. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my small purse, feeling like a shadow. I thought I'd cry, but no tears came. Instead, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when you finally stop expecting anything on the train ride home. The city blurred past the window, bright lights, tall buildings, fast lives. I remembered the little boy who once held my hand and said, "Ma, don't worry, I'll never let you cry." And now he was grown, successful, respected, but I had never felt so unseen. When I reached home, I didn't light the lamp that night. I sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the fan. The house felt heavy but also safe because here at least silence didn't hurt. I whispered to myself, "It's over now. Stop waiting for what won't return." The next morning my phone rang. It was Arjun. "Ma," he began, his voice hesitant. "I saw you leaving last night. Why didn't you say goodbye?" I closed my eyes. "You seemed busy, Beta." He paused. "Reena didn't mean what her friend said." "I know," I said quietly. "It's all right. It's just they were joking." "Of course," I said again softly. He didn't notice the break in my voice. Or maybe he did and didn't know what to do with it. After a long silence, he said, "Ma, please don't take it personally." I smiled through tears. "Don't worry, Arjun. Mothers don't take things personally. We just feel them deeply." He sighed. "I'll come visit soon." "I'll be here," I said. "Always." When the call ended, I stared at the phone in my hand, realizing something final. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just learns to exist quietly without expectation. That day, I took out my diary, one I hadn't written in for years. On the first blank page, I wrote, "There is pain that shouts and there is pain that whispers. The whispered kind is harder to bear." Then I closed it and sat by the window, watching the sun fade behind the trees. That night, for the first time, I prayed not for closeness, but for peace. For both of them. For myself. Because I finally understood. Some silences are not cruel. They're just the sound of people growing apart. But still, a mother's heart never truly lets go. It just learns how to hold love differently, quietly from a distance. The days that followed were quieter than usual. The phone didn't ring much. The doorbell stayed silent. I started keeping myself busy. Each morning I swept the veranda, watered the tulsi plant, and made tea for one. The rhythm of ordinary life became my company. Sometimes I'd talk to my husband's photo like I always used to. Did I do the right thing? I'd ask softly. The silence never answered, but in my heart, I felt he understood. One evening while cleaning the cupboard, I found an old photo album. The cover was worn, but inside so many smiles. Arjun as a baby sitting on my lap. His first day at school. His birthday cake with candles half melted because he couldn't stop laughing. Page after page, I saw the years rewind. Every photo felt like a whisper from a time when love was simple, unspoken, and pure. I smiled and cried all at once. I realized something that night. Maybe love doesn't vanish when people change. It just becomes a memory that you carry quietly, like a folded letter in your heart. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Reena's mother. "Namaste, Asha ji," she said kindly. "How are you?" "I'm all right," I replied, unsure where this was going. She hesitated before saying, "I wanted to tell you something. I think you should know." Her voice was careful, almost apologetic. "Reena, she's not been herself lately." After that office event, there was some tension. She told me she felt embarrassed by what happened. She didn't mean for things to go that way. I was quiet for a moment. "She said that?" "Yes," her mother said softly. "She may not say it to you directly, but I know she feels guilty." For a second, I didn't know what to feel, anger? Relief? But then I realized none of that mattered anymore. People say sorry in many ways, sometimes through silence, sometimes through someone else's words. "Thank you," I said gently. "That means a lot." When I hung up, I sat there for a long while, listening to the sound of rain against the window. It was strange. I didn't feel bitterness anymore. Only a quiet sadness that was slowly turning into peace. The next morning, I decided to do something different. I went to the temple again, the same one I'd visited months ago. As I stood before the deity, I whispered, "Give me strength to forgive, even if no one asks for it." Because forgiveness, I realized, is not about others, it's about freeing your own heart. That small prayer felt like a release. Later that day, I started teaching neighborhood children again, simple reading and writing lessons. They'd come after school, sit on the floor, their little eyes bright with curiosity. Their laughter filled the house in a way silence never could. One girl, barely 7, called me Nanny by mistake, and I smiled so wide it hurt. Every time those children laughed, a piece of my broken heart mended. Maybe this was life's way of giving me back what I had lost. Not in the same form, but in spirit. One afternoon, as I was helping the children with their homework, I heard a familiar voice outside. "Ma." I turned. Arjun was standing at the gate. He looked tired. His shirt wrinkled, eyes heavy like he hadn't slept properly. Behind him stood Reena, holding a small box of sweets. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I run to him? Should I smile? But I stayed still, waiting for him to speak. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "Ma," he said again softly. "Can we come in?" I nodded. "Of course, Beta." Inside, they both sat quietly on the sofa. I served tea without a word. The children had already left, but their laughter still echoed faintly in the air. After a long silence, Reena spoke first. "Auntie, I'm sorry." Her voice trembled a little. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you. That night I should have stopped them. I should have stopped myself." I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not arrogance but shame. Her eyes were red, her hands fidgeting nervously. I felt something soften inside me. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was just age. "Reena," I said quietly, "we all say things we regret. What matters is that we learn from them." She looked down. "I hope you can forgive me." I smiled gently. "I already have." Arjun was quiet the whole time. His eyes were fixed on the floor. When Reena finished, he finally spoke. "Ma, I should have said something that day. I wanted to, but I didn't know how." I sighed softly. "You don't have to explain, Arjun. You were caught in the middle." He shook his head. "No, Ma. I was a coward. You didn't raise me that way. You taught me to stand for what's right. And I failed you." My throat tightened. For a second, I saw my little boy again. Not the man in front of me, but the child who once cried when he broke my bangles by accident. I reached for his hand. "Beta," I said gently, "we all fail sometimes, but love doesn't keep a record of that. It only remembers the good." Tears filled his eyes. "I missed you, Ma. I missed you too." We sat there, holding hands, the silence finally feeling warm instead of heavy. Reena opened the box of sweets. "Ma," she said shyly, "we found out yesterday. I'm pregnant." For a second, I just stared at her. And then, without even realizing, I began to cry. Tears fell faster than I could wipe them. Not out of sadness, but something deeper. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, life was giving me a second chance. "Really?" I whispered, smiling through tears. She nodded. I placed my hand gently on her head. "God bless you both." Arjun smiled faintly. "We wanted you to be the first to know." That small sentence, those few simple words, healed more than any apology could. The rest of the evening passed softly. We talked about small things, recipes, the baby, even old memories. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel lonely. When they finally got up to leave, Arjun said, "Ma, we'll come again next week. Maybe you can come stay with us for a while. Help Reena." I hesitated. The wound of the past still lingered faintly, but I smiled and said, "We'll see, Beta. One step at a time." He nodded, understanding. Before leaving, he turned and hugged me tightly. The kind of hug that says everything words cannot. I closed my eyes and held him just as I used to when he was a child. After they left, I sat by the window again, looking at the moonlight spilling across the floor. Life is strange, I thought. It takes away what you love, only to return it when you've learned to let go. Forgiveness had not erased my pain, but it had made space for peace. I whispered a small prayer into the quiet air. Let their home be filled with love. Let them never forget kindness, even in anger. For the first time in months, I slept deeply that night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, bright and gentle. I brewed tea and sat in the veranda, watching the neighborhood children play. Their laughter rose like a song. Inside my heart, something light began to grow. A calm acceptance, a soft gratitude for what remained. Sometimes we wait for people to change before we forgive them, but sometimes forgiveness is what changes everything. That day, I opened my diary again and wrote, "Peace doesn't come when people say sorry. Peace comes when your heart stops needing them to." I smiled as I closed it, because finally, after all the pain, I understood. Love that expects nothing never dies. It's been almost a year since that day. The house feels different now. Not because it's filled with noise, but because it's filled with peace. Sometimes I still wake up early, just to sit in the veranda with my tea, watching the sun rise. The tulsi plant has grown taller. There are new leaves, fresh and green, like small signs of healing. Every Friday, Arjun and Reena visit. They bring fruits, laughter, and stories from their week. But now there's someone new with them, little Arif, my grandson. The first time I held him, I couldn't speak. He was so tiny, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, eyes half open as if trying to understand this new world. When he gripped my finger, it felt like the past and future had met in that one small touch. Tears rolled down my cheeks and I whispered, "You are the peace I prayed for." Reena smiled quietly beside me. I could see it, the change in her eyes. The distance that once lived between us had faded, replaced by something gentle, something real. These days when they visit, I make her favorite halwa again. She stands next to me in the kitchen, watching how I roast the flour slowly. She calls me Ma now, not Auntie. And every time she does, a part of me feels forgiven and forgiving. Sometimes she helps me with chores. Sometimes we just sit together talking about little things. She tells me about her work, about motherhood, about her fears of doing everything right. I listen, and I tell her the same thing my own mother once told me. No mother is perfect. We all learn by loving. She smiles softly and nods. Arjun has changed too. He talks more now, calls me almost every evening. Sometimes it's just to ask if I've eaten, or to tell me Arif laughed for the first time that day. Once he said, "Ma, you were right. Silence can be the loudest kind of pain." I didn't say anything, just smiled because I knew he had finally understood. We don't talk about that night anymore. We don't need to. It's part of our story. A painful chapter, but one that led us here. One afternoon, as we all sat in the living room, Arif crawled toward me and pulled himself up by holding my knee. Everyone laughed. Reena said, "He loves you the most, Ma. Maybe he knows what your heart went through." I looked at her surprised. She wasn't being dramatic. She meant it, from the heart. I smiled. Maybe he's come to teach all of us love again. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I think about everything that's happened. The shame, the silence, the loneliness, and the quiet forgiveness that followed. It all feels like a long monsoon that has finally passed. The air smells fresher now. And even though the sky still carries a few clouds, I've learned not to fear them anymore. Because I've realized something important. Hurt doesn't define you. How you choose to heal does. The other day a neighbor asked me, "Asha ji, after all that pain, how can you still smile?" I thought for a moment before replying. Because I learned that peace doesn't come from others saying sorry. It comes when you stop wishing they would. She nodded quietly, as if she understood. And maybe that's what life is. Not about having perfect endings, but peaceful ones. At night, I light a small diya near the window. Its glow is soft, golden, steady. I sit beside it and write in my diary. Small notes, short thoughts, just to remind myself that I'm still learning, still living. One page reads, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without breaking." Another says, "People hurt you, but life heals you slowly in its own time." Sometimes I imagine my husband sitting across from me, smiling quietly, as if proud that I finally found my calm again. Last week, Reena asked if I could come stay with them for a while to help with the baby. I said yes. Not because they need me, but because I want to. As I packed a small bag, I looked around the house. The walls that had witnessed every tear, every silence, every moment of prayer. It no longer felt like a place of pain. Felt like home again. Before leaving, I whispered, "Thank you for holding me through it all." At their home, everything felt alive. Arif's toys on the floor, the smell of dinner from the kitchen, Reena's soft humming as she rocked him to sleep. I stood at the door for a moment, just taking it all in. Reena turned and said, "Come in, Ma. You're home." That one sentence was enough. Enough to melt away every leftover trace of hurt. I stepped inside, smiling. Because I knew I wasn't walking into a new beginning. I was walking back into love. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, I went to the balcony. The city lights shimmered in the distance. I closed my eyes and let the breeze brush against my face. So much had changed, yet in that moment everything felt right. Life doesn't always give us the apologies we hope for. Sometimes it gives us something better. Understanding, peace, and the courage to love again. I whispered to the night sky. Thank you, life, for teaching me that silence can heal too. If you're listening to this and carrying pain in your heart, remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing peace when the world offers you anger. Love doesn't disappear when people change. It transforms quietly, waiting for you to notice. And when you finally do, that's when healing begins.